So you're young and you want to retire early. How are you gonna do that? Stick around to find out. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Josh, and if you're new here, this channel is all about finance and investing. And if you're anything like me, you have all sorts of friends and people in your life who have all these big dreams for what they want to do with their money and their life and their travel and their retirement, but nobody really talks about the systems that you need to get there. What does it actually take? What do you have to be doing as a young person, let's say a 25-year-old, in order to guarantee the fact that maybe one day down the line, you will be able to retire early? Well, that's the exact point of today's video. I actually want to take you guys through what I would do with a client. And again, if you're new here, I'm a certified financial planner, and a big part of my job every day is to help people look at, what are my goals? I want to retire one day. I might want to buy a vacation property. I want to put my kids through school. We have to work with software and with our financial planning expertise and investing in different products to try to make sure we can make that happen for them. So today, live on this camera, I am going to show you what it really would take for someone in their early to mid 20s to start putting away. What strategies would they have to utilize so that they could retire early if they really don't want to work for the rest of their life? So here we are on the dashboard where I'm going to set up a brand new client who is a fictional but real person, and we're gonna call him, let's call him Jay Mazzini. How about we do that? And how old do we want to make Jay Mazzini? Let's make him, he's born January 1st, in the year maybe that I'm born, 1995. And he is born in Ontario. For the sake of this example, we're going to be using Canadian facts, but we can easily just translate this for the Americans who are watching this as well. We're going to get started with Jay Mazzini, and conveniently, he wants to retire the moment he gets out of jail at 55 years old, which would be considered an early retirement, right? Now, what do we want to use for life expectancy? Well, maybe you're sitting there and you smoke and you drink and you don't have a neck and you kind of look like a turtle and you don't think you're going to make it to 100. Maybe you're only going to make it to 90, maybe only 85, but let's be conservative and do life expectancy until 90. And now, as financial planners and investment managers, we have to make assumptions about things like inflation and inflation rates and indexing rates for like government pensions and benefits, but let's just keep that all standard at 2%. Then we have to make some assumptions. Then we have to make some assumptions about rates of return on different investments. So I think I've entered this in pretty, reasonably. Fixed income like bonds, those might get us 3%. Equities like stocks might get us 8%, and cash will get us 1%. So these are the assumptions we're going to use when we're building out this retirement plan. So let's continue. Now, the first thing we need to think of is, what is our income like and what is our income source? So let's say we make money from a pyramid scheme. And we have a pyramid scheme that is doing quite well because we're closer to the top levels of the scheme. And let's say we're making about $75,000 a year. We tell all our friends we make six figures, but we make $75,000 a year. That is fully taxable, and it is fully eligible for tax-free accounts. That's where it says RRSP eligible. Now, for the sake of a pyramid scheme, and because pension plans are becoming a lot less popular, let's assume for now that there is no pension plan in the picture. So we're going to talk now about the assets that Jay has. And I mean, you're young, but things happen. Sometimes you get robbed for like $20 million at knife point and somewhere in New Jersey. But maybe you do have a little bit of money left over after all this is said and done. And maybe you've been able to stuff away what would be typical for a 25-year-old, probably $10,000 in random altcoins. So let's put some cryptocurrency holdings in here. We're going to value those at about $10,000. You can't really put those in tax-deferred accounts as of yet. And we're going to say that those would be considered 100% stocks for our purposes. And my guess is we're probably going to expect a negative 20% return. Those are probably just going to become worthless over time. But let's add some real assets, because maybe our parents stepped in and said, hey, go talk to a legitimate financial advisor, not all your cryptocurrency stuff. So you decided to do some tax-free investing in the traditional way, some stocks, some bonds, that sort of thing. And so we make an investments column. And we're going to say at 25 years old, maybe we have $20,000 to invest, okay? And we're going to have about 80% of that money in stocks and 20% of our money in bonds, not because we have any idea why, but because our financial advisor told us to do that and we trust everything they say. Now, if we go over to things like their contribution room, whether you're in America or Canada or wherever, the government allows you to invest tax-free for many different purposes, but they limit the amount that you can because they want to make sure billionaires aren't getting off scot-free. We'll assume that Jay has about $20,000 in RRSP room. For Americans, that's the equivalent of a 401k or an IRA, and the equivalent of a Roth would be a TFSA. So we'll say there's about 50,000 or so of room in there, and these are just numbers I have off head just from doing this scenario all the time. So let's assume that with the pyramid scheme, they have a generous plan. They might even match investments that you make into some company plan, kind of like a company retirement plan, but not a pension. This would be considered perfectly like a 401k in America. So we're going to add our equivalent of that. We'll say pyramid scheme investment plan, PSIP. And we're gonna say there is $0 in there because we're just starting, and we are going to have this as a retirement account. Now let's go like this. We're gonna do the same thing our financial advisor told us to do. 80% of the money in stocks, 20% of the money in bonds. That should get us about a 7% rate of return over the course of our life. Now, we also have to think about what real assets are in the picture, not just financial assets, but do we have any physical assets? And because most of our stuff has probably been seized by the government after a lot of dubious activity and being charged by the federal government, we might only have not a ton of real assets left over, but let's assume you think the world's gonna end and you put $10,000 in physical gold bullion because you are a conspiracy theorist. So let's put $10,000 into gold, and we're just going to assume, you probably think that's going to double every 5 years as we get hyperinflation, but it's probably going to go up with inflation. So we'll keep that at a 2% growth rate. Look at this, we're making our way. We've got our income taken care of, we've got some of our assets in here, and let's move on to debts. And what we do know is that young people tend to have debt. They have student debt, maybe they have, gambling debt because they got in trouble and they don't want to have their fingers broken. So let's put in some gambling debts in here that we need to repay. What do we owe? Let's say we owe $10,000 in gambling debts, and for you this might be something as simple as a student loan. Interest rate on that, probably let's say 4% right now, and we're going to assume that we're putting about $300 every single month towards that. Are gambling losses tax deductible? I think they are, so we're going to make that loan tax deductible as well. Now, we also have some other debts, let's say we don't want to disclose because maybe they were illicit activities. We'll call them other, and we'll put $5,000 in debts there. So this is relatively what I see for a 25-year-old, maybe 30 or 1,000 or so invested in various places, and a little bit of debt that we're taking care of, but slowly. We'll call that a 4% interest rate, and we'll say we're putting about $150 a month towards that. So we have a solid picture of somebody here. We have income, we have assets, we have debts. Let's see what this creates. And when I hit this next button, we're gonna see a massive projection, and I'll walk you through all of it, but don't get too intimidated. That's an annoying beeping sound. So here we are on the full out projection. We see from age 25 all the way down until age 90, projected out all sorts of things. I'll highlight the ones that are important. First, we have these income columns up here. Things like, what's our taxable income? How much cash do we have? How much money are we making from our pyramid scheme? And then we move over to tax and deductions, thinking about the province or the state that we live in. How much are we gonna have to pay into government plans? And how much are we gonna have deducted off of our paychecks because of taxes? We're calculating all of this stuff. This is what we would do for a client if they were looking for some sort of financial plan or projection. Moving on is probably the most important part. We have our capital assets. We have 3 different sources, right? We have our cryptocurrency, we have our investments that are more traditional, and we have our pyramid scheme investment plan that our employer was so kind to create. But we have to show that our employer is actually matching these contributions. So I'll come back over here. We'll say that the employer is going to match. They are going to match our plan, our pyramid scheme investment plan, and usually we might have something like the employee contributes 3% of their earnings and their employer will match that. That's very standard, the kind of thing that we see. So now we have everything in place to do a full-on retirement projection, and we're gonna be able to see how we save money in different places and if it is enough to create our ideal retirement. So let's say, for instance, that in this example, Jay wants to retire with $75,000 per year at the age of 55, and that would be considered an early retirement for most people. So we'll scroll down to the age of 55 and enter in, okay, how much money do we want to solve for? Well, let's say 75,000. and we'll copy that down until he's age 90. We're trying to see how much we would need to save or where we need to get to live off of $75,000 after tax and after inflation, right? When we're planning for retirement, there can be inflation, there are future taxes, there's a lot of things we have to think about. But now we can rerun the scenario and see how it looks. And if I scroll down and see any red, that's a bad sign. And yeesh, Jay is in a terrible position because although he has a decent amount of money invested, it doesn't look like he's going to have nearly enough money to retire early. And there could be many different reasons for this. And this is my job, is to try to sort out, okay, how can we shift money around or save money in different places to make sure that when Jay gets out of jail, he can afford to retire for good, so he doesn't have to worry too much. So let's take a look at what's actually going on here. What we see in the debt column is that, 3 years out, all of the debts are taken care of. And this is really helpful when you're helping an individual or a family trying to plan, should we prepay our debts first, or should we invest first, or should we pay off the car, or that sort of thing. For now, we see that Jay has all his gambling debts taken care of by the time he's 28. He is clean and he can move on. His real assets like gold, we're just going to assume he keeps those forever because he thinks the world's going to end, but it never really does. So he doesn't really ever have to use that. He keeps it stored underground in his backyard. Now, if we move on over to the retirement income side of things, what are we seeing? Well, we see over here in these purple numbers that there is money being withdrawn. He's withdrawing from his investments and he's withdrawing from his work retirement plan, but there isn't nearly enough money. He can only really afford 3 years of retirement before he starts going into red. And red in this software means we have a deficit. So at this point, we do what everybody does from grade 1 onwards, is we use the greatest problem solving tool we have, guess and check. So I'm essentially going to use guess and check to try and determine what is the amount of savings we would need to put away every single month if we have $20,000 invested and we want to retire off of $75,000 every year. At 55, what would we have to save? And my mind resorts to a number probably between $500 and $1,000 a month. That's my guess on what it would take. So let's use something like $600 per month, which is $7,200 per year. So I'll go to his investments and we'll assume now that Jay is going to put $7,200 into his investment fund until he's 54, until he's ready to retire. And what we'll do is we'll get the software to crunch the numbers again, and we'll see if we still see red. And the answer is yes, we still see a ton of red. So this means that we're probably going to have to come up with even more investments to help Jay retire. And now we're gonna model this as if Jay can save $1,000 a month up to the maximum of his tax-free limit every single year. Now what happens when we run this? Do we get close to being able to retire? Well, when we scroll down, we find that there is still a ton of red. So what we found is that even after trying to stuff $1,000 a month into our investments, we're still not even close. So we're gonna have to resort to another investment account because we've already maxed this one out. So we're gonna go back to our assets and we're gonna say, okay, Jay, instead of just having a tax-free savings account, the equivalent of a Roth IRA, we're also gonna open an RSP, or the equivalent of an IRA. And what that's going to do is just give us another way to invest in a tax-free environment. We're gonna call this Investments 2, but it's going to be in a separate account. So we're gonna once again say, okay, we're gonna have 80% of this money in stocks, 20% of the money in bonds. Where does this get us? Well, let's go back to the page. And what we're gonna try to find out here, guys, is how much Jay is gonna have to save, because what we're seeing so far is that even $1,000 a month isn't going to cut it yet. So let's move on to investments number 2 in his retirement savings plan over here, this new account we've just created. And let's imagine we can put another $500 per month into this account as well. So now we're at a total of $1,500 per month. $500 a month is equal to $6,000 a year. We can copy that down until retirement age, and let's run this one and see if that gets us enough money. And I'm hoping so, because asking a client to contribute $1,500 a month at 25 is no joke. And what we find is we still don't have enough. So the reason that retiring early can be really difficult is because your government pensions, which help supplement your retirement, only really kick in at 65, unless you stipulate otherwise. So that means the gap from 55 to 60 is a 10-year span that you have to fund completely by yourself without any help from any government pension plans. So what I might do here is go into the government pensions and take them at 55 instead of, you can't even take them at 55. We'll take them at 60, instead of 65, so we can get some extra time out of them. So we'll move over here. We have CPP starting at 60, we're starting at 60. So we're running into a few roadblocks, and this is really what my job looks like. It's me kind of just like smashing my head against a computer, trying to get the software to check out on all the different tax legislation and making sure the money's in the right account and it's invested the right ways. But for the sake of simplicity, we're not going to tell Jay that he needs to rethink his retirement. We're not going to tell him he needs to take less money. We're going to encourage him to save more, because obviously he's very good at saving and stuffing money away. What happens if we go all the way to $2,000 a month? So now we're going to be putting $12,000 a year into the tax-free savings and $12,000 a year into the RRSP. We're going to see if that gets us there. And this is really what we're doing, is we're rejigging the numbers, trying to find out where is the right balance. Where do we get to? And what we find is that there is no more red at this point. And what that means in the software is that we have successfully created an income for Jay that will last from 55 until 90 after inflation, right? So if we look at what his real income is, at age 55, it would be about $133,000, but after inflation and after taxes, he can only spend $75,000 of that. So $75,000 from 55 until 90. And we can even look at some cool visuals on this. We see how his different assets can grow over time. In the green there, we have the tax-free savings account growing and then being withdrawn down. Same thing for his other investments as well. And here we see the different sources of income. So in orange, that's his pyramid scheme income he's making for his career. And then at 55, we start to take out some investments and we start to withdraw to bridge that gap between retirement and receiving government pension. It's a lot of our own work in there. And then that blue and that black line, that shows the government pension starting to kick in around age 60 and 65, and then our investments kind of bring us throughout the entire rest of the period. So this is how retirement planning works, guys. This is what goes on behind the scenes, and it's a lot more in detail, it's a lot more in depth. For instance, one thing here I'm already seeing is we haven't pegged his income to inflation. So right now, if I peg his income to inflation, we'll see that grows at 2% now. Let's go index at 2%. And we'll run this again. And now what that's going to show us is, like most people, your income will rise as inflation rises and certain things like this. And we can do interesting things like tax planning and should we take out debt to invest, and all these different ways we can analyze this. But the moral of the story here is, and there's no way your situation is going to be exactly like Jay Mazzini's here, but the reality is that even if you have $20,000 invested, it is probably going to look like quite a big savings hurdle to be able to retire at 55 successfully, even if you are investing somewhat aggressively. $2,000 a month is no joke, and here we can see, if you run down these columns in yellow, it's showing the maximum we can contribute to different accounts. So I think the most we ever contribute is $2,000 per month, but as time goes on and we max out accounts, it comes down to about $1,500 a month in the long run. There would be a lot to iron out here. There'd be a lot of work to do that would make this a 30 or 40-minute video. But for the sake of today, this gives you a general picture of how we model out retirement for people and how we look at these sorts of scenarios. So there you have it, guys. That is as quick as I could possibly build something on camera. If you guys like videos like this, maybe we can make a full one day that would be much longer. But the reality is this is the job when you're doing investing or when you're doing your financial planning. If you know how to invest and you've got your investments figured out, essentially what you have is like a really fast car, but you don't really have a map, or you don't really know where you're going. This is like your Google Maps, creating a financial projection or a plan of where things could go and what accounts you need to maximize for tax purposes and how you're going to withdraw them down in the most effective way and how you're going to pay the debts and reduce your income tax. These are all pieces of the puzzle that need to make its way into your financial plan. Your financial plan isn't just throwing money into random ETFs and say you're done investing and doing some Bitcoin on the side. You need to create a map and something that shows you what you're working towards. And ultimately, the real value in a projection like this is you can recheck it every single year. You revisit and see, are we behind schedule? Are we ahead? How does it change our future if we make an edit here versus an edit there? And that is the process of financial planning, which sounds really boring, but it can actually be really fun when we see the kind of lifestyle it can create for us if we tweak things and do things a little better. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate you tuning in. I know it's been a lot of numbers, it's a lot of jargon, but I hope you followed along. If you've learned anything whatsoever, make sure to hit that like button below, hit subscribe to support the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos just like this one every single week. Until next time.